there's definitely a coexistence for sure. So switching gears, I love to chat about the trade-off about self-sovereignty, so like custodying your own assets relative to custodying it with centralized entity. There has been a few security breaches, and generally just wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on what are some of the different ways that you can be most cautious about that, and maybe some of the differences in securities between MPC versus multi-sig. Mike, you want to take this one?
Sure. So look, the great thing we now have is the option to decide, are we going to hold it ourselves or are we going to use somebody else? And I think if we lived in a world, 20 years in advance from where we are now, and everything's digital assets, some things you would use on your own person. And other levels of asset holding and companies you interact with, you want to hire people that help manage your funds, pass it on to your children should you die, things like this. So there's definitely a role for both the decentralized capability, the non-custodial capability, and the custodial capability. But more importantly, if you're managing someone else's money, you are a fiduciary, you are held to a much higher bar in terms of what you're doing and how you're managing those assets, what your transparency is, what your fail-safes are, what your audits are, what your operating controls are, and how you manage it. So, look, we're going to have both of these things. It's very possible. Now, at the technology level, since you mentioned MPC and multi-sig, I think the vast majority of people actually don't care that much about the differences there. Like, as a custodian, as a fiduciary for other people's money, you have one job. Don't lose the money. That's the job, right? So, look, there's more to it. You got to keep audits safe. You got to do reporting properly, etc. So BICA does both MPC, actually especially interesting in addition to multi-sig. We use the right tools that are appropriate and we make sure that's all held in deep cold storage, because that's the job of keeping it safe.
Awesome. Annabelle?
Yeah, no, I agree, right? Our job is to continue to preserve the wealth and then not lose it. And the way that we pick the custodian providers, we've been building that in-house, is also with that in mind. I'm not the custodial wallet tech expert, but we do also use MPC-related technology for the reason of having security and also flexibility. And I think that's what we want to offer ourselves and also our investors. And I think this question, though, comes down to the education needed and the current UI UX. Right now, we actually speak to a lot of the clients that are new to the space. They run maybe their traditional family offices, their ultra high net worth themselves. But if I tell them to, hey, set up your own wallet, whether a Ledger or MetaMask, it's still very difficult for them to use. It's almost like, why am I bothered with this? So somebody has to come in and provide some easier way as an alternative. And I think that's what Amber's building, what Make Explore, and many others are willing to be that middleman. I think that's the value of CeFi. I don't think decentralized finance change how finance works, right? So credit risk exists in CeFi, exists in DeFi. Maybe it's the pool is taking the credit risk as opposed to another counterparty, but it doesn't change that. But I think people still need a sort of a middleman to help abstract away the complexity. And when you're interacting either on-chain or off-chain with other real-world assets, I think maybe this is the key difference. And to your point, what is the difference between CeFi and DeFi, and how do we onboard users? Ultimately, maybe it will be a combination. Everybody will land on a spectrum. But I know for a fact that there are a lot of institutions out there who are perhaps constrained to face a DeFi pool or a DAO, so they still need sort of a prime broker or someone in the middle to provide services for them. And I think it's hard to see this pocket going away anytime soon. But I think DeFi is, in terms of product innovation, it is perfect playing ground for that. So before joining the CeFi platform, I was actually working with one of the very early DEX. I don't know if anybody still remembers as one of Consensus folks, AirSwap. So I guess I do see both sides of it, and we need both, but I think right now most of the people still prefer a CeFi platform.
For sure, yeah, there's definitely a usability piece there for a lot of users who aren't crypto native yet. So switching gears, I'd love to talk about, when we're talking about the crypto institutional stack, it would be remiss to not think about generally in the world, there's like this shift of like, monoliths becoming modular. I think a really good analogy would be the one that Jeff Bezos used in like 2006. He was trying to pitch a lot of startups to use AWS for cloud storage. And his whole premise was, look, you should just focus on what makes your beer taste best. And this is kind of back in like the 20th century. Electricity was something that wasn't commoditized yet, so all these beer brewers had to like have their own power generators. But over time, the breweries that won are the ones that then just rented electricity and focused on like the spices and their go-to-market and all that. And we saw that also at Uber, right? It was back in the early 2010s. It was a very monolithic architecture, mainly because a lot of these B2B SaaS offers didn't exist yet. But then even 4 or 5 years later, when I joined DoorDash, it was pretty clear that everything that wasn't key to our pricing algorithm or matching algorithm was then basically outsourced. So in the crypto ecosystem right now, there's it's still rather monolithic. So would love to hear your guys' thoughts on any advice to founders when you think about, in the crypto space, this shift of monolithic to modular. Maybe Brooks, you want to start here?
Absolutely. I do think our former employer was a great example. There was a dream at one point. We were both there that you would go to any city and be able to take 5 or 6 different modes of transportation with one press of the app, with one payment, and be in a taxi, a carpool, a bus, go on a flying plane, and have an autonomous vehicle take you home. And that was great, except those are all very different businesses that were going on one platform. And I think this example of going to DoorDash and specializing is very important because we really feel, and I think that goes back to our roots, and I think this is a panel that actually has that in spades, really realize that you've got to do one thing right. And for us at Ripple, it is very much the focus on the cross-border payments business, the treasury finance business, liquidity and crypto liquidity. If we can do that right, it gives you the license to kind of do other things along the way and develop other business models. And it's also the case that I think around the industry and around this room, around this awesome conference that's held today and tomorrow, that we should be comfortable that there may be people in our space that are going to do certain things better than we are. And if we all focus on our specialty, this all seems to hold together much more, in a way as an industry. Because we are so early innings, that we all need to rise together.
Absolutely. Sophia, any thoughts?
I was thinking what is the biggest and simplest product in our industry? I think it's probably stablecoin, right? It's a great invention, everybody uses it, and there's so many user scenarios, and it only does one thing. I think that explains how we can all build, put our strengths really into the thing that we did best and really work together. I think if you look at back in human history, our path to modernization and to globalization, a lot of that is associated with division of work and also specialization. I think that tells how important it is to have that to boost efficiency and productivity at scale, right? So I think it's the same for our industry. I remember a few years ago, this is a lot of people, if they need to build an app, they still need to build their own wallets, right? And I think now we don't really see that because everyone just go to one custodian. And the traders in the early days, they don't have prime brokerage. They have to build 20 plus connectivities to all the exchanges. And now they have DeFi, so they also have to build the rails to DeFi. And now we have prime brokers to provide them one-stop access to all those liquidity venues, plus leverages and capital efficiency. So I think, this industry really moves fast, right? So you really don't want to shorten your time to market and put your time on the things to polish your products, your go-to-market strategy, your sales and marketing, rather than building the rails over and over again.
Awesome. Yeah. I don't know, Mike, do you have any thoughts on this? We're
Well,
a software engineer, so.
Software is invading the financial markets, right? So things are changing very, very rapidly, and probably more rapidly than any other market, in part because there's been pent-up demand for decades to have change in the space. Now, because the regulators don't quite understand where we're coming from, because traditional finance doesn't quite understand this, there's a whole lot of questions, a lot of people that have been brought up to speed, and that results we've actually ended up with pretty siloed offerings across the crypto industry today. So we've got these completely verticalized stacks where a single entity is your exchange, is your broker, is the broker for the other party, is the clearinghouse, is the custodian, all of these things wrapped in one. And this creates a new problem, which is that anytime you have single point of control over that much responsibility, it ultimately ends up having failures. Sometimes those are intentional, Bernie Madoff. Sometimes those are unintentional, right? But you have to start breaking this apart and actually opening up the next wave of like real massive institutional money is going to require that it come. Everybody's watching. A lot of capital has come in. A lot of it's still coming in. Actually, the global macro climate probably helps us bring it in, even though there's a high level of risk with the current market structure that we have. But if we fix the market structure so you don't have single counterparty dependency on one exchange, when you make that deposit with no protection from bankruptcies, we fix that problem, it's going to fully unlock the deposits.
And what was your thoughts?
No, I think they explained sort of everybody's role in this industry to be perfectly well, but I think also just on the very, very base layer or on layer 1 or layer 2 side, right, that's what we're working on, modular versus monolithic. And there are a lot of teams out there building something like this, and that actually our base layer can power so much more. And then obviously there's so much on top that we can put together as an industry.
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk about something a little bit more technical, drilling one layer deeper on the premise of matching and DeFi. Would love to kind of talk about the evolution of like AMMs or like automatic market makers, shifting potentially more to be like order books. And we recently saw for Uniswap V3, they're moving along the optimization curve. And so, they kind of are acting more like an order book. And maybe the question here is there a world where like AMMs existed because it was kind of a happy solution when we didn't have the institutional rails in place? And now that it is a more mature market, this is kind of where we're shifting back to order books because it is inherently more efficient.
I guess I feel like I have a lot to say about this topic.
Yeah.
So I think switch back to maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the DEX is out there. Most of them are just the decentralized part is decentralizing the custody part. So it looks exactly like a centralized exchange, just that you need to connect to your wallet. So that's running on an Oracle system, and it's the one that was most liquid back then. And there are others that are running sort of RFQ. So there might be Kyber, and also our stock back in the days, where we would match users' order with market makers, sort of like a FX, OTC, or a dark pool type. And that in itself was difficult to bootstrap. First of all, there's not that many market makers back then that can trade on Ethereum or DeFi yet. Therefore, less liquidity, then there's less users. And it's a chicken and egg that was really difficult to solve until Uniswap V1 came along. So AMM, what it solved is that it removed the dependency on any kind of market maker. Anybody can list a pair, can trade. People didn't care the slippage. That was the point. Most of it came from either HFT or a trading background. That was news to us. Like, how can users not care about this massive slippage? But they didn't. They just wanted some liquidity to trade, and I think that revolutionized or actually bootstrapped liquidity into the DeFi system, and that was incredible to see. And of course, then when there's enough trading volume and people start to see either from the loss or the slippage they're actually facing, then they are working to improve that. So there's V2 and V3. Then you're looking. And then now it's looking similar to maybe how traditional finance works. So I think it is a process where we needed some innovative ways to bootstrap liquidity. And then once we grow big enough pool, then we can actually tackle the specific problems. But yeah, this is essentially, I feel like, the history of DEX so far.
Sure. Mike, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think actually there's an unsolved problem in finance, which is the global regulatory solution. And we have regulators in all the countries, each taking a slightly different approach to how they regulate. Now, what is that regulation doing? I mean, it's monitoring brokers to make sure that they're not telling you to buy while they're selling, right? So it's this ongoing lifetime of regulatory overhead, and everybody does it differently. It leads to different markets, you trust at different levels. Smart contracts, DeFi, normalize all this. We actually have an opportunity to get regulation that works across the globe by way of smart contracts that don't need to be monitored on a day-by-day basis. Now, we have problems, getting like the technology right, so we got all the bugs out, we got to get good programming languages that have fewer security holes in them and whatnot. But if you get through that, then you actually finally crack the nut on how do we do global regulatory. Because otherwise, this is a completely unsolved problem of traditional finance. So anyway, I think it's in its early days. There's more to be done. It's not quite ready for institutional. There's a bunch of regulatory compliance, identity things to be solved, but those are coming over the next couple of years, and then we have a global financial system.
That's awesome. And this kind of a really good segue into the next question, which is what more can crypto do for like our global financial system? Maybe Cynthia, you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, I think blockchain can really change our lives. That's my fundamental belief, and why we're in this industry, why we're all here like today. But I think there are a few areas I really personally want to care to see improvements, and where I think blockchain can add a lot of value to improve that. One is 24/7 trading and settlements in the financial industry, which now is not happening, but it's already happening in our industry. So as we expand the scope of our industry by having more real-world assets and financial assets being represented by token or NFT, and bring all that assets onto the blockchain network, I think we can use the infrastructures we have built today, whether it's custodians or it's exchanges or it's prime brokers, to really kind of disrupt and improve how trading is done in the financial assets space, asset classes. The second one, I think, is small amounts cross-border payments. I think a lot of firms are trying to solve that problem. It is a big problem, and it's very expensive and uneconomic now. I think that's very important for the next level of financial inclusion, is really to solve the payments and issue. Yeah, I think that's very good.
Alex, pick up where Cynthia left off. We were in Manila last week with a big part of our team, and like every one of the companies in this room, our employees are mission driven. They care deeply about the business, and one of the things you can see when we're sitting there with a partner of ours, IRemits, who's the largest remittance payout provider in the market, it's not a bank, the impact that is having, the ability to move money from a worker in the Saudi oil fields to the village in the Philippines and do that instantaneously, bring that cost down, not have that money go missing, because chances are there's a code-related hospital bill or an education fee that's due. And so this notion of whether it's a remittance form or small business loans or treasury functions, just moving this body around is key. And then going back to Mike's point, I think this regulatory comment is so huge for all of us. I mean, we all work in this industry where the regulatory relationships matter. And it's really incumbent upon us, just as it was in the early days of the ride-hailing business, to explain to regulators what this was all about, what this is going to change, and what it can do for you, the regulator, your country, your citizens. And so I think all coming together around that and doing it in a way that's simple, that is uniform, it doesn't have us tripping over each other and having jurisdictional arbitrage, and that which does strange things to business models into these markets we work in. So, we can't spend enough time, and we'll take every regulator meeting that we can get. And thankfully, in this part of the world, the regulators want to talk to us, including here in Singapore, which is great, because that is the way the relationship should be. Two-way, helping each other get towards the goal of a jurisdiction that works.
Yeah, I think if we think about the future being blockchain-based, and I think we all agree, which is why we're all here, right? What's the end goal is having everybody who's using the internet now somehow interacting with blockchain. It has to be smooth. Maybe it's better to be sort of senseless. You don't even know that you're interacting with blockchain. That's what people are building. But in terms of the very infrastructure side, I think payment in its own, how do you on and off ramp is the most difficult, the biggest hurdle right now for a lot of users to even start interacting with any on-chain assets. So maybe finance itself is difficult for users, but if you look at games or social interactions, we've already successfully onboarded wave users, and I think for a lot of us, especially for those of us who are based in Asia, we really do see the potential there. But then there's so much hurdle that needs to be cleared before they can seamlessly be integrated. So I think everybody working on the wall infrastructure, the cross-border payment infrastructure, being the gateway is incredibly important. And then after they are within the ecosystem, there's so many more digital assets or assets on chain that can be created. So much value being created, and it can be transferred seamlessly within the blockchain ecosystem. And I think that's eventually maybe what we see that the future of this is.
Okay, I just want to add one thing. Obviously, we got transparency leads to reduce risk. We talked a little bit about how regulatory can be completely upended. And where does this all go? The most important thing, and everybody in this room is participating. You're all here because you're evangelizing digital assets, change the way the financial system works. And at the end of the day, there's a human rights issue, which we are solving. We live in a world where money is part of how we do things. And the human right to be able to earn money, store that money, have that money preserve its value, and then use that for whatever it is, your housing, your food, your kids' education, etc. This is fundamental, and we're finally getting to solve it. Now look around the world, what's happening today with the US dollar, Fed cranking up rates, is having a massive impact on currencies all over the planet. We're seeing people that are seeing their local currency go down massively, and that's affecting their ability to live. And what are they clamoring for? Well, it's difficult to get something stable when your government is requiring you to deal with their currency only. They're clamoring for USDT. They're clamoring for anything that gives them a digital capability to get to something that's more stable. So there's a change that is underway, and it's going to be both financial and eventually political and monetary. But it's really going to change who's got access to money. It's going to make us all on a much better playing field. So anyway, if you want to have a change, I think that's the biggest ultimate thing that we get out of it.
I love that, yeah. Well, I think we have to wrap this up, so maybe we can do like a last round robin on things that you would love to see built, especially in the context of emerging markets or Southeast Asia, and any predictions for the future. Maybe we'll go this way.
All right. Well, listen, I guess I can spring to one. Look, there's a lot of road to hoe between here and there. I actually like the idea of breaking down, what is the global regulatory approach to money and digital assets and everything that we do. It's too pocket, too much siloed across different regions. We see I guess 4 companies here with 3 different headquarters under different jurisdictions, etc. Each of us with different jurisdictions in multiple regions. We've got regulators that are conflicting with each other. I guess if there's anything good that can come out of it, it's starting to address privacy. I think is missing a little bit from what we're trying to do. So maybe in the next couple of years we can augment everything we're doing with enabling privacy on top of it. Anyway, I don't know. There's a lot coming.
Yeah, okay, that's a big question. I think as an industry, we have a mission to work with regulators to figure out what is the right way to regulate our industry. Especially when a lot of things that's happening today, the innovation we're making today is unseen before, right? How to regulate DeFi? How do you balance the supervision and investor protection with the need of innovation? And how do you balance centralized and decentralization? I think that's one thing, it's an evolving and very important subject in our industry. So I would like to hopefully contribute to that. I mean, as one of the participants in the ecosystem, and really, hopefully, in the next few years, we can have a more clear and healthy regulation. I think that's one. The second one is that we all care about the potential of our industry, and our potential of the industry to some extent is represented by the market cap, right? Now we have less than 2 trillion, which is mainly contributed by the crypto native assets, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and things like that. So I'm really bullish about NFT and the way how it could bring the real world assets onto this ecosystem. So the market cap probably could tenfold in the next few years or more.
I think we've cut a couple of big points, which I would just want to reiterate around transparency, but also trust. Because anytime you build a network or a marketplace, That ability for people to want to participate in that is predicated on trust that system to hand over that paycheck or whatever it is, or to trust that that flow for payroll, whatever the case is in our industry, payments. And so anything we can do and focus on around the trust element and doing everything right. We're in an environment where with conflicts around the world and jurisdictions and regimes that are off limits, we all need to play on the right side of that every time. We create an environment we do it. I would put in one last point, which is this is the third kind of business that I've had the opportunity and privilege of building out of Singapore. And this is a great place to hire people, to bring people in, and to build and to do things much bigger than Southeast Asia, much bigger than APAC. This is a global center, and I think one of the things that I think we'd like to call out is this is an opportunity for Singapore around fintech and crypto to take a global handle and be global headquarters, as some of the entities are. So I'm excited about where this is going if we all hang together.
Yeah, and again, I want to reiterate all the points that was brought up. I think ultimately, I realized that a lot of our role is actually here to educate. So this is something that we've committed ourselves to. Educate our clients. So back in the day, it was telling what is Bitcoin, what is Ethereum, and now maybe it's explaining what is a CryptoPunk or 4 days. But there are demands, and they want to buy, they want to be a part of communities one way or the other. But one thing we're certain is that there's always going to be so many changes, so many innovations that come out. So in one part is maybe us working with the regulators, making sure that they will be able to see the way to let innovation sort of take its place, and that there are more assets that are made available. And on the other hand, that we have to work with the end users to educate and continue to provide relevant information, market information. And that itself is already a challenge because everything changes so fast, and not even just in crypto. I think in macro land, none of us would have expected UK to become an emerging market type of economy, right? And so I think if crypto taught us anything, said, everything changes.
For sure. Yeah, I think if you look in the 90s, very few Fortune 500 companies were technology companies, and you look now, the most valuable companies are all tech companies, and I think the same will be true for crypto. Because ultimately, when you think about what is useful about a blockchain, is the composability nature of it, and the fact that the data is completely transparent so that anyone can build on top of it, and that there is no central point of failure. And I really like this book. It's by Ori Brofman. It's called The Starfish and the Spider, and it's a book about it's about leaderless organizations in a military context. But I think it's very apt for crypto because ultimately our traditional financial systems, I think, is like a spider, and I think DeFi and crypto in general is more like a starfish, right? So how does that analogy play out? It's like with a spider, you have this big head and you have all these limbs, and generally you think about like centralized banks would be the head. You cut the head off, all of the depositors, being the limbs, are the ones who actually lose out based on bad decisions or mismanagement from this one entity. Whereas with the starfish, there is no head, it's just a bunch of limbs. And if you break off a big part of the limb, the starfish is intact, number one. Number two, the limb can actually become a new starfish, which is really, really fun and generative. And then in DeFi, you think about it in terms of like a single participant actually being very risky with how they think about their allocation. Like, on MakerDAO, they actually really lever up and they explode. Everyone else is actually okay. And this is really important because ultimately it's actually really hard to differentiate a spider from a starfish sometimes. And I think Celsius is a really good example of this, actually. And so, like, maybe the takeaways here is twofold, right? Centralized entities sometimes, when attacked, become even more centralized, and they actually try and take control in a more, I guess, aggressive nature. And then decentralized entities, when attacked, actually become more open and decentralized. And number two, this idea of like giving access to so many people can be scary, but many times people actually rise to the occasion and contribute. And a really good example of that, I think, is just like Wikipedia being kind of like a decentralized canon of information is just as accurate, if not more comprehensive, than the centralized version of that, which is like Encyclopedia Britannica. And so like at the end of the day, I think composability sits at the center of what makes crypto really exciting and why we're really excited about it at ACCZ, right? It's this idea of being able to like, so many questions, right? Like what is the right architecture for data storage? Who are the people who should compute and store? I think sort of all groups are like super fascinating. And so as we're kind of wrapping up here, I know it's, you know, in the midst of crypto winter, but ultimately I think hopefully we're all taking a very long-term view about crypto as a very disruptive force. And yeah, I think now is as good as a time to build as any. So thank you so much for joining us, and maybe we can do a round of applause for all of our panelists here.